and welcome to our live broadcast. The notion that the United States coordinated with Israel to allow Hamas to attack and slaughter over 1,000 Jews is reckless and, in my opinion, abhorrent. The United States remains under constant threat and attack by Russia and China with Iran's assistance. They do this to covertly influence and destabilize American government institutions, sow division and fear, and cause confusion throughout our nation. The idea that our nation would allow such an attack to move forward is beyond reality. Here's what I believe. I believe that Israel and the United States and many other Western nations have grown to rely on intelligence signals at the expense of human intelligence. We must remember that the critical piece of any accurate intelligence program are plans and intentions. That is, the plan, decision, timeline, and the launch of the events lies in the head of the leadership team. You're not going to discover it today in a phone call, a text, or an email. The tidbits the Israelis had ahead of time likely alerted them about a potential attack, but had not reached the level of providing Israel enough data to craft an actionable plan for the leadership of Israel to approve. Think about this. It's very similar to the scenario we faced in the days running up to 9/11. We believed in our bones. Al-Qaeda had a plan in motion, but we didn't have enough intelligence to strike at it. Then 3 days before 9/11, Afghan leader Ahmed Shah Massoud was murdered by Al-Qaeda. We knew the final countdown was activated at that point, but we waited for the intelligence picture to evolve more, which it did on the morning of 9/11. Israel just experienced the same thing. They faced a savage, skilled, and experienced enemy, and for the hundreds of operations the Israelis have thwarted, one got through. Let me welcome our operatives, Sam Faddis, who ran the CIA's weapons of mass destruction, and John Keyes, another operative who regularly joins us to talk about these issues. And also, journalist Carrie Sheffield with the Independence Women Forum will also join us today to ask questions. So let me start with you, Sam. What is this Israeli invasion is going to look like? And what are the minefields that they must consider? You're evacuating over 1 million people. There's no running water. There's no food coming in. And once this evacuation is done, what are their intentions? What do they intend to do with Gaza moving forward?
Yeah, well, I think you just put your finger on the center of the issue, Armstrong, right? I mean, it's one thing to pull together a bunch of guys and go in and clean out the place in the sense of killing Hamas operatives. That's not an easy thing, and that won't be painless. But in a certain way, that's relatively straightforward. Then come the real questions, right? Okay, you just did this in a place where, I don't know, it's half the Gaza Strip we're talking about, so 1 million people live. Are they coming home? Where are they going? If they're not coming home, and what's your plan for preventing this from just all regenerating and happening again? I'm not sure the Israelis have an answer to that question, which actually I think is one of the reasons why they are why they're apparently delaying this. I think what they would like to do is just clean the place out and shove everybody out someplace else, but there is no ready answer to where those folks are going to go.
So, Mr. Keyes, I read a story today where it says that the global power axis has tilted toward Russia and China because, again, America is distracted on two fronts in Ukraine and now Israel. Your thoughts?
I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, we're stretched pretty thin in the United States. They've deployed another battle group. When a carrier battle group is an enormous logistical undertaking, and now they're off the coast of Israel somewhere in the Mediterranean. But we're looking at this, and I agree with Sam. I think there is a sense of caution that reality has swept in, that you can't just overrun the place and ignore the the facts on the ground that you just have so many people crowded into that area of the country. And urban warfare, I mean, I hope there's American advisors that are talking to them. When you move mechanized armor into a packed urban area, which we experienced in the Iraq conflict, it is a bloody slugfest, and you will lose a lot of people, you will lose a lot of civilians, you will kill the enemy, but the cost can be staggering on both sides. And this is not a war that you can win in the public sphere by having the videos of a slugfest between Israeli armor and dismounted troops on the ground in a packed urban environment. It's like Midtown Manhattan, the way things are crowded in the Gaza area. It's just a densely populated and concrete mess. And the strengths of Israel's operational capability are better applied surgically. I don't like that word, but in small unit tactics, try and rescue hostages. Every cycle of darkness, we should have an enormous advantage, or they should as well, because of the technology they had to operate in a complete darkness, and just erode them down without having the horrible imagery of heavy artillery being used and armor operating in an urban area.
Carrie?
So I guess my question to the experts here, what have you seen in terms of the Abraham Accords? You know, I was there on the White House lawn as a journalist, White House correspondent, when those accords were signed. Have they provided any sort of buffer? I've been told that perhaps they've helped with the Americans when they were evacuating in terms of the flight patterns, being able to go to some more, friendly countries to exit Israel. But was there something broader in terms of the implications of Abraham Accords?
Sam?
Well, I think there are some incidental value. There is some incidental value, as she just indicated. But I mean, the way I look at the Abraham Accords is this. I mean, it was a stupendous achievement, and it put us on the path toward resolving issues in the Middle East that had seemed completely intractable for generations, really. Right, we just had accepted that the Middle East would be a mess, to use a technical term, forever. And all of a sudden, there was this possibility that would not be true. Now we're looking at, I mean, we've already seen damage to that ever since Joe Biden sat down in the White House. But now we're looking at that all going up in smoke. I mean, my biggest concern out of this whole thing, Armstrong, is not anything that has happened to date. It is the possibility that everything you've seen so far is a preamble to a much bigger general war. We are not just necessarily talking about how Israel's going to clean up after Hamas did this. We don't yet know that Hezbollah, Iran, a variety of other Iranian surrogates aren't going to come into this, and you're going to really see a much broader regional problem, a war.
Well, Sam, and related to that, we've got a statement from our Secretary of State Blinken saying that there's intelligence to suggest that Azerbaijan might invade and potentially go into Armenia. What would that entail, and what should the U.S. response be?
Well, I mean, this is an indication of what I'm talking about, right? Is that, okay, you just lit a match, and I don't mean to be snarky. I'm not trying to minimize the fact that already a whole lot of people have lost their lives. I'm just saying we've lit a match. We have this problem all across the region. There are any number of ways in which this thing could really spiral out of control. I saw something online, I haven't had a chance to confirm, just a little while ago, about how Hezbollah supposedly just took out all of the Israeli surveillance cameras along the northern border with Lebanon. Well, there's a reason for, if that is true, and I have not yet confirmed it. That's a pretty ominous sign, because you don't take out all the cameras unless you are getting ready to do something. And Hezbollah alone, Hezbollah is not a little terrorist group, a few hundred guys hanging out. Hezbollah is an army. I mean, they got ballistic missiles. They've got all kinds of stuff. They dwarf Hamas even in capability. Right there, those guys coming into the fight changes the whole equation.
You know, Mr. Keyes, when you're listening to Sam, it would seem as though that Hamas in this attack, even though they are a militia, they're not some army, they had to think this through on what Israel's reactions would be and obviously what the consequences. So in the larger scheme of things, when you think about the issue of hostages, I saw where the Hamas leader announced today that they were free. They've come to some kind of agreement where they'll free all hostages except the Israeli hostages. But it's obvious that Israel has made a decision that their hostages are going to be lost, particularly given as they think through this invasion into Gaza.
I think they can keep the pressure on without giving in. I think there's opportunity. It requires, I mean, there's so many facets to the decision making for Israel. And as Sam mentioned, if there's a northern front to this and Hezbollah starts moving across the border, or at least shooting across the border, that'll be a factor that make this 10x worse than it is right now, because of the level of violence that can be inflicted on Israel. It's a tiny place, and they have enemies in every direction, and this could be extraordinarily difficult to manage if it turns into another front in Israel. But they should. I'm hoping, and when we're telling what to do, that always sounds so awful with somebody making a comment. I would just hope that there's an opportunity to just manage their strengths, use them, apply them with a ruthlessness and precision that they're famous for, and erode them down inside of Gaza without moving in and creating a really difficult situation once you move armor inside of a city like that. And operating at night, they have the advantage. They have enormous help from other allies, and Hamas is not the same as what you have a capability of Hezbollah, but you have to expect that Iran's going to go for broke. I mean, they're doing this to make themselves relevant and to disrupt the Saudi-Israeli reapproachment, and they've succeeded in putting everything on hold for at least a short time, and to see where this plays out. It's really a mess.
And it's obvious that the PLO will become irrelevant and Hamas will rise as a game changer in that region. We're going to take a break here on Your Voice, Your Future. I'm Armstrong Williams, and we'll be back. Sam Faddis is also senior editor of A&D magazine. Sam, what are we not seeing here? Do you think Iran and Russia and maybe China are playing a role in these unfolding events?
Well, look, I understand. Let's just start with Iran. Initially after these attacks, there were some statements by the administration that it was unclear to what extent Iran had played a role in this. Okay, that's disingenuous. I mean, that's just dumb. I mean, if it's true, they don't understand anything, and I don't think it's true. Hamas is a creature of the Iranians, as is Hezbollah. They're trained by them, equipped by them, financed by them. Hamas did not launch a full-on assault against Israel and start this war without the Iranians not just giving the okay, but being involved in all of the planning and all of the preparation. I mean, Mr. Keyes alluded to this earlier. This is not just Hamas. This is Tehran. That's who you're face to face with. And all of their surrogates like Hezbollah, and they're all across Iraq as well. I don't know to what extent the Russians and the Chinese were involved, but certainly it is to their benefit, right? I mean, I'm reading every day about how we're shipping arms now to Israel and sending support. Well, the last I heard, we were already cleaning out our warehouses in all over the world, including the Middle East and South Korea, to arm Ukraine. So I'm not quite sure where that's coming from, but we're getting real close to not having the capacity to arm our own troops or resist and or continue to support Ukraine. And God help us if the Chinese move on Taiwan while we got two carrier battle groups in the Mediterranean and we're shipping all the weapons we have left to the Israelis. So certainly to their benefit, even if they're not directly involved.
No, I mean, I agree with you that the notion, as our president said yesterday, that we don't know if Iran was involved is very disingenuous. I guess my question, though, with Iran, the Trump campaign and others have said that, and I'd love to hear your thoughts to both of you. They've said that part of why this happened was because of sanctions that were lifted under the Biden administration to the tune of $80 to $100 billion in oil sales that we've seen going to China and elsewhere. Is there truth to that? Is that part of what's bankrolling essentially this invasion of Israel?
John?
I think that there's a big component to the cash. Iran was in a very difficult box during the past administration and crippled. Sanctions do work. It takes a long time, but they were biting. As soon as you let off of that, you've let off of the most effective tool to hurt them. And I keep hearing discussions from public officials about conclusive proof or evidence. They talk about this. There are facts that lead a reasonable person to believe that Iran is under the direct influence and responsive to the pushes and orders that they get from Moscow. The Ayatollah was a graduate of the Patrice Lumumba University in 1968, and Mahmoud Abbas was in the same class. To think at this point that they are not collaborating directly with the Russians is just folly. They're clients. They're clients of a long-term, smart, and thorough intelligence program that the KGB and the Russian intelligence systems have run for decades to cultivate people that they can call on in the future. And some of them rise to be high office holders in different places. And then now you've got guys who are leading two major client states that are loyal to that system and from that system and steeped in that system. And we can't ignore that. I'm at a loss to understand why we dance around with these comments from a public level and just don't address the facts on the ground. They got outmaneuvered. The Hamas pulled off a pretty complex operation, and then we try and patch it up and come up with a decision that is a good decision. When you're on defense, you have to choose the least worst decision. You're not guiding events. It's like the whole Ukraine thing. The way to deal with our Ukraine problem was to preempt the invasion with aggressive action and comprehensive maneuvering before the first tank crossed into Ukraine. Now we have the same kind of scenario has played out, and the Israelis have a myriad of really bad choices, and they have to pick some that are the least bad. And it's a horrible situation. We're maneuvered into in a lose-lose scenario. It's just how bad is this going to be to get it to stop?
You know, Sam,
positioning.
You know, what's interesting is we often come from the perspective of the Israelis, but the Palestinians who, not all of them reflect the leadership of Hamas and this decision that was made to attack the Israelis' families and institutions like savages. I mean, you're talking about a community that is already poor, and they're being forced to uproot their home. What is the future for these Palestinians? And also, why is these rumors that President Biden himself is going to Israel?
To take the second part of the question first, I don't know, and God knows that the last thing on earth anyone would want at this stage is for Joe Biden to personally show up there, because I can't imagine what he will add to it. I think the first part of your question hits on something really important. There's something like 2 million people in Gaza, and it's about 5 miles wide and 25 miles long. It's maybe the single most densely populated place on earth. And the government is Hamas. Not just Hamas is there or powerful or has influence. Hamas runs that. So the Gaza Strip is run by an ultra-violent terrorist group. And there are a lot of bad guys in Gaza, and then there are just a lot of people that are stuck there and can't get out and don't have any other recourse. And to add to that, Hamas doesn't want them to get out of the way, because the way Hamas fights is to utilize civilians as shields, right? If you're face to face with a building and it's filled with Hamas fighters and you know there's no civilians in there, you drop a bomb on it from an aircraft and you flatten the place and you're done. If you're going house by house clearing buildings because you know that there are non-combatants still stuck in here, now you literally have to kick in every door, mark every target, distinguish combatants from non-combatants in a completely confused environment. It negates, as I think was indicated earlier, a vast amount of the technological advantage that the Israelis have. This is what we ran into in Fallujah, right? Literally, the insurgents would stage ambushes inside of buildings. They would let you come through the door into the living room and then have set up to ambush the Marines inside a room where you're now fighting it out 10 feet away. It's horrible.
Yeah, Sam, I mean, this is, I spent time in Israel as a journalist working in Jerusalem for the Jerusalem Post, spent some time in the West Bank, and I think it's important that you're pointing out the big difference between Gaza and the West Bank. You have Palestinians in both territories, but it really is the failed leadership of Hamas that is suppressing its own people, whereas in the West Bank, the GDP per capita is higher, and there is more economic freedom, there is more personal freedom. You've got Fatah running things over there. Not to say that it's heaven over there by any stretch of the means, but I do think it is important, as Armstrong said, to think about this from the perspective of the Palestinians and the human toll that we're going to see, potentially 1 million people, and they're trying in some respects to go over to Egypt, but the Egyptians don't want them either. So you're going to have a lot of people who are going to be stuck in the mix here, and our prayers are definitely with them. I guess my question here is, and maybe Mr. Keyes, when it comes to the UN, we've seen reports that the UN's own supplies that were supposed to be given to the Palestinian people who are suffering in Gaza, that they've been stolen by Hamas, the supplies from the UN. And now you have the UN, it seems to be a little bit weak-kneed in its condemnation of Hamas. Is there any role for the UN or international bodies, or are they just basically impotent at this point?
You bring up a good point. The UN is a hopeless effort at that place right now. Hamas has total control. And it's difficult for Westerners, all of us, to understand or grasp the visceral hatred that is generated by Hamas and a lot of people that live in the Palestinian areas. I spent most of my career in the Middle East, and you talk to Palestinians, a lot of people. Some of the things that are said routinely by people that you wouldn't expect to think that way, that say, I wouldn't care if they set off nuclear weapons and I was killed in the blast as long as all the Jews were dead when the dust settled. When you have people that believe that and they feel that way, so I look at the Israeli resilience and their capacity to deal with it, and I don't know how they do it. They live with that all the time, which it's difficult to grasp. And how do you hate a group of people that you really don't know like that when you're taught from birth is how you do it? You teach people to hate from the time that they're born, and it's toxic and evil. And the Israelis are trying to hold on to the Holy Land that they have, their homeland. It's just a vexing problem. But the Palestinians are not honorable, in large measure, honorable interlocutors. They'll tell you what you want to hear, and then they'll stab you as soon as they have a chance. And this is ugly now. It is very ugly, and the UN doesn't add to it. Hamas doesn't care how many Palestinians die. It's irrelevant to them. They're just tools. They're tools and opportunities to hold back the tide. That's all.
Finally, Sam, there are these protests that are going on in the United States. I mean, John Huntsman just pulled his funds from UPenn because of what UPenn is allowing the faculty and the students to say in their support of Hamas. You've seen what has happened at the prestigious Harvard, where there's putting posters of those that support Hamas on buses, and corporations are saying they're not going to hire them, they're rescinding their offer. But what people don't realize in many of these marches is that many people, it's not just people of Palestinian descent and people who are sympathizers to Palestinians. There are many New York Jews and other East Coasters who are also marching with them, who are very sympathetic to Hamas, and they want Netanyahu to cease what he's doing right now. There should be no more killings and no more violence. How do you respond to that?
They are at best deluded, if not evil themselves. I'm sorry. Look, this is not about Islam. Myself and your other guests worked all over the Middle East for years. Most of the guys we worked with against Islamic terror were Muslims. Most of the guys doing the dying on our side, fighting Hamas, Hezbollah, etc., were Muslims fighting to save their religion from guys who are barbarians and want to drag the world back into this twisted 6th century view they have of Islam. I saw a picture the other day of a bunch of young ladies with a sign that said something like "Gays for Hamas," and I don't even know what to say. You're expressing support for a group that would murder you on sight and revel in it because you are sinners. They would destroy you, slaughter you, and you are so lost in space that you actually are celebrating this. Mass murderers, that's who you're celebrating. I don't know any other way to say it.
And well said. As we saw in Hamas's attack in Israel, they killed Muslims, Palestinians, they killed everybody. They could not even differentiate, nor did they really care, and was laughing and spitting on them, and then after killing them, sitting on the body as if it were a couch. I mean, yes, it's the naivety and the ignorance in this country and the propaganda that these kids and these professors buy into is really scary. Listen, Sam and John, thank you so much for joining us. When we return with Carrie talking about her book, and also Tiffany would also join us to talk about her book and talk about the vote. That and much more on Your Voice, Your Future. We'll be back.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. Will Jim Jordan secure the speakership tomorrow, Carrie?
Your guess is as good as mine. There are definitely two factions happening right now. You've got the Jim Jordan faction and then the Patrick McHenry faction, and who knows, maybe there'll be a surprise sleeper.
He seems to be gathering steam. He has some major Republicans crossover, but there are Republicans who say under no conditions will he be confirmed as Speaker tomorrow when they tally the votes. And the Democrats are saying maybe we'll give the Speaker pro tem, Patrick McHenry, more power so they can do more.
Well, and some say they might even cross over and potentially vote for someone like a Patrick McHenry to avoid a Jim Jordan speaker.
Well, they had someone like a Patrick McHenry, Kevin McCarthy, and they ousted him. The Democrats did.
That's what made no sense to me, because they repaid him for going in a bipartisan deal to get the avoid a shutdown, and then they repay him by throwing him out. And the hypocrisy that Matt Gaetz was angry at him at Speaker McCarthy for making a deal with Democrats, and then he turns around and makes a deal with Democrats to oust him. Isn't it? So it defies logic, but that's what this town's all about, right?
But you have written a new book, Motorhome Prophecies, and what themes or messages that there's a Motorhome Prophecies, what themes does that convey to us?
Well, the title is called Motorhome Prophecies because I grew up largely in a motorhome. And it's called Prophecies because my father claims growing up, and he has Alzheimer's now, so he's not really active, but growing up he claimed he was a prophet that would become president of the United States someday. And in order to fulfill this prophetic call, he made us live in a motorhome with my 7 biological siblings. So we had 10 people living in a motorhome, if you can imagine. Not a pleasant thing, especially when it came to using the bathroom. But it just, the book is a cross. My publisher is Hachette. They're calling it a cross between Hillbilly Elegy and Educated by Tara Westover, which are 2 books that really describe what it's like to grow up in a very struggling, abusive, working class, white American environment. And in the case of Tara Westover, like myself, it was very rigid Mormon fundamentalism. So my father was excommunicated from the Mormon church and basically created his own homegrown cult where he was very abusive to us. Eventually, I had 2 brothers who developed schizophrenia because of the abuse. I struggled with a lot of suicidal ideation and depression and anxiety and PTSD for many years, episodically, because of the abuse. And child abuse is greatly associated with suicidal ideation and other problems as adults. And so I tackle a lot of these very heavy concepts in the book. My day job, I work in politics. This is not a political book. It's about much bigger issues here. It's about the family. It's about mental health. It's about the fact that our culture, I believe, is turning away from God, which is what I did for about 12 years. So I was agnostic for about 12 years. I was so angry at God because my father abused me in the name of God. He said that when I told him I wanted to leave the cult, he raised his hand and he prophesied, I prophesy in the name of Jesus, you'll be raped and murdered if you leave. And this was, shortly after one of my schizophrenic brothers had tried to rape me. And so at that point I had to make a choice, and I chose freedom. I was declared legally estranged from my parents in order to get Pell Grants to pay for college. Was able to put myself through Brigham Young University, got a full Harvard scholarship for my master's in public policy. It was a journalism scholarship. And I worked really hard, got to work on Wall Street, worked at Goldman Sachs, worked at Moody's Investor Service. So there are many messages to this book. One is that this is an amazing country, that the circumstances of your birth do not determine the outcome of your life, but that also that God is present, and people who abuse God's name and abuse children in the name of God, God has it out for them, but at the same time, we can rise above that, and that God is real and that God is present. And coming up on my 6-year anniversary, baptism into the Christian faith, Protestant, on December 3rd.
Does one ever heal from that trauma?
It's interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine who he was repeatedly raped by his own mother, as well as multiple of her boyfriends, and was bouncing around in foster homes until he was adopted by a loving Christian home, I believe when he was about 12 or 14. And now he's in his 70s, and he's married and has a lovely, daughter and grandchildren. Earned a PhD, very brilliant man, pastored a mega church. And we were talking about it because he's toward the end of his life, and here I am, toward the middle of my life. And he said, I'm like, well, your life is amazing. You've sold all these books. Like you're this incredible speaker. And he said, you know, I every now and then I still have feelings. I still will feel abandonment issues. I still will. It sometimes just hits me. But because I am rooted in the love of God, I overcome it. You know. So he said the feelings will still arise, but he's always able to overcome them, and that, I believe, is in the Bible it talks about the the peace that surpasses understanding. And let me tell you, Armstrong, I've been through some horrible, hellish situations, but the fact that I'm here in this chair and like on a daily basis, I really enjoy my life. I have a wonderful church community. I get to travel the world. I love my work. I love what I do. And that's, to me, that is a peace that surpasses understanding.
You know, how does the concept of Motorhome Prophecies relate to broader social and cultural issues, and what can readers expect from the book in terms of insights and storytelling?
Well, I think in particular right now, my hope is that it will really resonate with people as it relates to mental health. So we have a major mental health crisis in this country. You're seeing suicide rates skyrocket. What I've found, it's very interesting, young men are way more likely to actually successfully commit suicide, whereas women are more likely than men to consider it, but less likely to either do it or be successful in their attempt. But either way, for both genders, you are seeing a huge spike. And you're seeing a huge spike in deaths of suicide, opioid overdoses, alcoholic overdoses. And there's a lot of research that I put in the book. One was a study from the Harvard School of Public Health looking at how going to church is actually strongly associated with positive mental health and a reduction in suicide. It found that there's a 68% reduction in suicide and death of despair for women if they go to church weekly, and for men it's a 33% reduction. So this is the science telling you that going to church is actually very good for your mental health. There was another study that came out this year from up in Boston, the National Bureau of Economic Research, NBER, and they found something similar too. In states that had a drop in religious attendance, they saw an increase in suicide. So a big message and a big theme for me in the book is that God heals you. It is not just something that sounds nice on TV. It's actually proven in the numbers quantitatively by economists, by scientists. Again, this is Harvard School of Public Health that found that the first study that I mentioned. And so I think that another big theme that I have in the book is the difference, though, between God and religion. And that, I think, is a big part of a reason why I think people are walking away from the church, because you're seeing religious participation drop, is because they have church hurt and because they've been wounded, whether they're going through a divorce and their church doesn't support them, whether they were going through, a difficult, in my case, a very difficult family abuse situation, and I believe the Mormon church failed me, didn't do enough to prevent my siblings from developing schizophrenia, didn't do enough to take us out of that abusive environment. That people, and I'm, case in point, I walked away from religion for 12 years, but my message from the book, and what I want people to know, is that God is not religion. And if someone abused you in the name of God, that is not from God. Separate the two. Understanding, I like to joke, it's like if someone has a fake purse, like a Gucci purse, and it's got a G, and you can tell that that's a knockoff Gucci purse, that's the knockoff. That's not God. Using God's name to abuse you, like Hamas, like we were talking about, abusing, slaughtering and murdering innocent babies in their cribs in the name of God, that's religion, that's not God.
My heart really goes out to you. It's taken a lot of courage for you to write this book, Motorhome Prophecies. I encourage people to go out and buy it. Just an incredible story, and I'm just so glad that you're able to share your story with others who are also going through trauma, and particularly all over the world. So thank you for writing that book, and thank you so much for joining us. When we return, Tiffany Norwood and some of her friends are going to join us to talk about voting like a boss. That's up next on Your Voice, Your Future.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
You know, I always enjoy it when one of our personal favorites, Tiffany Norwood, stopped by the house to tell us what she's up to next. And now she has a new book, author of Vote Like a Boss, founder and CEO of Tribetan. And also, she's here with friends. Cornell Jones, CEO of Operative, Saul Paul, Grammy-nominated singer and songwriter and co-host of Vote Like a Boss podcast. So, Tiffany, I'm going to give it to you.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate being back, and hello to Saul Paul in Austin and Cornell in Pittsburgh. Thank you guys both for joining me.
Looks like somebody has a guitar.
Saul Paul is always ready.
Oh, ready, okay.
I don't know what he has planned, but he's always ready.
You know, what is the significance of Vote Like a Boss, and what motivated Tiffany Norwood to create this platform? How does it encourage voter engagement and empowerment?
Yeah, so, you know, when I wrote this book, it was during the pandemic originally when I wrote it. And I was really compelled that we focus so much on politicians and political parties, and we don't focus as much on us as the voter and the citizens and the act of voting and what it means to be a good citizen and participant of a democracy. So I wrote this book. It was actually originally a speech. But I wrote this book to talk about that, about voting as a leadership skill, voting as a growth mindset. I get asked a lot as a serial entrepreneur, you know, I've done 9 startups, about starting companies and being a founder. And, you know, during that period and during the voting period, I would ask them, you know, do you vote? Because if you don't think your vote matters, then you probably won't think your opinions and ideas matter. And it's all the same thing. It's all the same mindset.
So how do the figures like Saul, Paul, and Cornell contribute to Vote Like a Boss initiative? And what unique perspectives do they bring to the discussion on civic participation and leadership?
Yeah, so just like Carrie, your previous guest, and wow, what an amazing story and amazing book, right, Armstrong? I want to honor that for her sharing, because we are having so many mental health issues around the world during the pandemic, and to have a story like hers shared and for her to rise above it through faith was everything that I needed this evening. But Saul Paul and Cornell factor in, because after I did the book, I then did a TV show. It was a series that played on YouTube around the workflow of voting, because having traveled to now 57 countries around the world, being in a lot of conflict zones, I've spent, you know, a couple of weeks in the Holy Land, both in Israel and in Palestine. I recognize that democracy and what we have as democracy, even though, you know, it's been very trying for us as a country too, is truly the best form of government in the world. It's supposed to be the fun, enjoyable form. So I created this show that went through the workflow of voting, and it included music and celebration, and in the middle of it, we would register to vote. In the middle of it, we would get ballot ready. In the middle of it, etc. Saul Paul was my co-host of that show, and he would always perform some song, and he's a person of deep faith too during the show. And then Cornell was a supporter in general of the Vote Like a Boss movement and helping to pull the show together for me. And both of them were very active in their respective communities.
Well, let's hear from the panel. Cornell, let's start with you.
Yes, sir. So yeah, it was you know, number one, when Tiffany calls you, you answer, because she's a boss and you get involved. And what we did was I connected with my right-hand man, Gary Coleman, GJ Media, and he was able to put together, you know, and to work together with Tiffany and Saul Paul to be able to help make sure that we were able to stream a lot of the shows, then make sure that we had DJs that were there, and just utilize our platform to be able to help get people motivated. Some of the conversations after, Tiffany would share some words was always amazing. It was motivating. People wanted to get involved, and other people from all over the world were saying, how can we get involved in helping people to vote like a boss? And what I loved about what Tiffany was doing was she was saying it's bossy to be able to get involved, to not be on the sidelines, but to get involved. So if you look at yourself as a boss, you can't be on the sidelines. You can't play games. You have to make sure that you're using the voice that you've been blessed to have to be able to change the world.
Saul Paul, in what ways does Vote Like a Boss address the challenges and barriers to voting, particularly, say, in these underserved communities, and what impact has it had on increasing civic involvement?
It was a culturally relevant response. I think that is what was most exciting about it. Even when Tiffany came up with the idea and presented the opportunity, that's what I was enthused about. I was like, wow, this is a relevant way to reach people. We did it virtually initially because it was during the pandemic. And so to be able to stream and connect with people where they were, but more so myself, my background as a musician, I recognized that music brings people together. I was sharing earlier, everyone was like, oh, he has a guitar. I was like, I'm always with the guitar, like I always see you with the suit. And so the way I approach it was what I've learned being a career musician and having the opportunity to travel the world, be in various continents, numerous countries and whatnot, is that music was this unifying factor that would bring people together. And so being able to bring people together, and it didn't matter what side of the aisle they were on or what they believed about this, if they were passionate about that. But the reality is we needed ultimately civic engagement, and to be able to create an inviting platform. And as Tiffany mentioned earlier, to also make it be fun and inviting, that was the way.
Tiffany, I like what Saul Paul just said, because you know what? It doesn't matter who or what you vote for and why you vote for them. What really matters is that you exercise that right to vote.
Exactly, that's what matters. So, you'll see in the book and the show, we never talked about a particular political candidate or a particular political party. Our color was purple. We weren't bipartisan, we were nonpartisan. And I really love what Saul Paul said about how one of the strengths of the show was that it was culturally relevant. Young people got very involved. The show, and I just did a call for people to come and help because, like me, I'm fast with everything. And it just happened to be that the majority of the people that raised their hands were Black men, right? And they were spectacular. And to see those Black men attracting these other Black men to get involved with politics, it hit me the same way that Saul Paul just expressed, that it was more how we were speaking to people and having culturally relevant narratives and messages versus specifically a lack of interest.
A few weeks ago during the Congressional Black Caucus weekend, I was a panelist with the chairman of the Democratic National Committee, and it was called the Black Vote. And what they were doing, they didn't care about your parties, they didn't care about your politics. They just felt that it was important to get out and vote. And one of the former Barack Obama operative, Frank White, is the chairman of this organization. And I was so encouraged to encourage people to go vote, exercise that right, participate in your democracy, make a difference where you are, because when you vote, you have a right to criticize and have a say in the process. Talk about that, Mr. Lynch. Shola.
Sorry, Shala wasn't able to join us today, so Cornell.
Cornell, talk about that, Cornell.
Yeah, just wherever, wherever you're at, in this situation, nobody's telling you who to vote for. We're just telling you to get involved. I think the old pastor side of me, in the civil rights movement, they pushed people to get involved. And with this Vote Like a Boss, I feel like Tiffany took pieces of the civil rights movement and just pushing people through, as you see, through Saul Paul, through the arts. My program deals with returning citizens, so there was some training even through the streaming process. and bringing the community at large together. And I love the fact that the message was, no matter what your belief system is, we just need you to get involved. And I think that's us working as a village, utilizing the gift that our ancestors fought for, and utilizing the resources and utilizing the chance to be able to work together to be able to change our communities. And I think that's the first step. You know, when I turned 18, you know, I remember walking to the booth with my father. It was a rites of passage for me. You know what I mean? And we have to make sure that people know that this is important right here. And I knew that that was important. And that piece right there will be something that I'm going to do with my son. But I'm also going to let him know that, guess what? You need to vote like a boss. Get involved. Make sure your friends know that voting is empowering and empowerment. You know what I mean? So get involved as much as possible.
How do we get others involved, Tiffany, and have this kind of enthusiasm for the participation in the voting process?
Yeah, so first off, we are going to do a re-release of Vote Like a Boss for next year, and we're going to redo the show, and I'm even in discussions with someone about taking it live, so having that format in live in certain cities and places around the country. But also I encourage, and this is one of the challenges that we had with the show, which was to get one other person to vote, like a voting buddy, and always make it, as I think it was Saul Paul that said it, or maybe Cornell, make it a village. It doesn't have to be a solo activity. If you don't have a father or a mother that's taking you to the poll, Armstrong, like you mentioned, then you take one of your friends to the poll. I think DJ Marvelous one time, you know, on the show was like, make it a date, literally, like that girl that you want to ask her out on a date to the poll and get to know each other that way. It would be nice if you have a couple of minutes, since Saul Paul did bring his guitar.
Oh, and you know what? And we don't have the time. You
know?
Too
bad.
I saw my man with his guitar. I was hoping, but his perspective on this was more important than his music tonight. And we appreciate that. I want to thank all our earlier guests, Sam Faddis, John Keyes, Carrie Sheffield. Go out and get her book, her latest book. You just got to get a copy of that. And of course, Tiffany Norwood, one of my personal favorites. And thank you, WJLA 24/7 and your great team, and Howard Stark Holdings for joining us for this edition of Your Voice, Your Future.